today, if you have questions or whatever, I mean, I think Mel and I didn't talk about it, but I think we're good. If you want to just turn your mic off and ask questions at any time, we're pretty informal as far as like, we want this to be a discussion and we want this to be real and relevant. We'd like to do some introductions to get started. So if you would, in the chat, we'll go ahead and start introducing ourselves, but as we are, if you will, in the chat, if you'll kind of tell us a little bit about you, and in particular, we'd love to know what district, your school district you are with, and if you're with an organization, the name of your organization, what role you play there. So if you're a counselor or a classroom teacher or an administrator. So I put on here, for example, Conway School District, third grade teacher. So just real simple. So if you'll be adding that into the chat, that would be great. I am Gina Williams. I'm one of the co-directors in teaching and learning here at APSRC. And you all know what we do in education. We turn everything into an acronym. So APSRC stands for the Arkansas Public School Resource Center. And we have an office in Little Rock and we have an office in Springdale. And I'm housed here in Little Rock. I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of background on me, and then Mel, we'll meet Mel. She's doing this with me today. I just finished my 26th year in education. I started out in private school at Pulaski Academy, and then I spent 17 years in Greenbrier at Greenbrier School District. And I've been here at APSRC for 5 years. I can't believe it. It's just flown by. I was a high school math teacher for 16 years and then an administrator in the high school, and decided I needed to learn elementary. So I became a principal in the elementary school. So that's a little bit about my background. Mel, do you want to kind of let them know a little bit about you?
I do. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Melody Morgan, and I'm just completing my second year at APSRC, the Public School Resource Center. And so tickled to have all of you classroom teachers with us today. I have gosh, Gina, what have I got? 26 years in education. And I started in the district that I graduated. I have 12 years at Highland. I was a vocational business teacher at the high school. Kids and I built networks together and computer systems back in the day. And then I ended up being the high school assistant principal and the district technology coordinator there. And I have 6 years at the state, at the Department of Ed, where 2 different periods I was involved with the Public School Accountability Division, as well as your state assessment director for a couple of years. I spent a little time in U of A, in that environment, kind of like a sister contract with the state, doing a lot of the calculations for our accountability systems back in the day, when it was No Child Left Behind back in the day. And then I spent 6 years continuing to grow at Springdale as a district level leader at the Springdale School District. So I don't know if that gives me anything that you need, but I promise you, I feel like I've seen things come and go, a lot of change, and I hope that it gives me the experience to know that I've been in your shoes. I haven't been in the pandemic. That's the one thing Gina and I say. That's one experience that we don't have that you do. You bring that to the table, having served in a really, really trying time in our school district. So we commend you for sticking with it and being there to learn through that with your staff and your students and your family and community. So we appreciate y'all.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Mel and I are co-directors together. She's housed in Springdale and I'm here in Little Rock. And both of us have this really deep love for data. So we're excited to share with you all today all about ESSA. So we're going to jump in and kind of go ahead and get started. And I want to give you a little bit of background. When I first started here at APSRC, ESSA had our ESSA plan for Arkansas had just been approved. And I was charged with get some training out to administrators. We got to get the administrators trained on ESSA. And as I was going out and doing the training with administrators and also doing some of the work that we do in schools, it just kind of really hit me that, you know, this training, we need this training for classroom teachers, because in case no one has told you guys, let me be the first, if no one's ever told you this, Classroom teachers are the most important people in the entire ball game. Like you are the most important, the ones that are in front of kids. And so I kind of went back to my ESSA training and redesigned it with the intention of getting it in front of, and I kind of was an overachiever at the time. I thought, I want to get this in front of every single classroom teacher in the state of Arkansas. That was my goal, because I wanted everybody to truly understand our accountability system. And so when I started this, I started realizing that a lot of people don't even know what ESSA stands for, right? Or what it even is. We hear it, but they didn't really necessarily know. And so I want you to know that ESSA is a federal law. It's our federal accountability system, and it stands for Every Student Succeeds Act. It replaced No Child Left Behind. So No Child Left Behind is gone. ESSA took its place. It stands for Every Student Succeeds Act, and it's our federal accountability system. Now, we also have this thing in the state, which is something different. It's in the state that gives our schools letter grades. So some of you may be familiar with your letter grades. It's an accountability system, but conveniently, our state decided to base our state letter grades on our federal accountability system. So the two kind of go hand in hand. So one of the reasons I thought this was so important for teachers, besides the fact it's our accountability system, was when letter grades came out, some of you may have heard things like, you know what, we're a C school. That is not okay. We have to be a B school by next year. And it was like, mic drop, right? Like they forgot to tell us, well, how do we do that? How do we move from being a C school to a B school? Like, what does it take? What's it made up of? So I hope that today, through the first part, I'm going to do the first part and take us through ESSA. I hope that through this part, you're going to get answers to all of those questions. Like, how do we change from a C school to a B school? What does it take? What is it made up of? But I think it will also answer other questions like, oh, now I know why I'm using that program in my classroom that my administrator told me I had to use. Or, oh, that's why we use that other assessment tool, but I didn't know why we were using it. So I think that a lot of this information is so vital to teachers because it's really going to answer a lot of your questions that you may have. And by the way, again, y'all, really informal here. If you have questions, just unmute and go, hey, wait a minute, back up. Okay, I want you all to feel very comfortable doing that because that's important to me. I want you to feel comfortable just stopping me and asking. So here's what we're going to go ahead and start talking about ESSA, Federal Accountability System. The elementary and middle indicators are very similar. They're really nearly the same. And the first one is weighted achievement. And I don't know how long you've been doing this, how long you've been in this business, but I've been doing this since the 90s. And I can remember the old accountability system and the old assessments, the end of course exams. And we've always been held accountable for achievement. So this is not surprising that achievement is one of our indicators. However, the word weighted is new. It's never been weighted like this before. And so I'm going to show you how it's weighted so you can see how you can get more points. Okay. So weighted achievement, achievement's always been there. We've always been held accountable for our achievement on our state summative assessments. We know that. It's just now it's weighted. The second one is a big success. As classroom teachers, we should really be jumping up and down that we got this. The state heard us and the state said, you know what? Growth is huge. Growth is really important. And as classroom teachers, we all know that's the business we're in. We grow kids. And I can remember under the old assessment, when we only got credit if a kid passed the test, that was it. Didn't matter how they passed, how high they passed, just if they passed it, got a point. If they didn't, you didn't. But I still took some kids that I really worked hard with and I really focused on, and I moved them a long way. We grew a lot. We may have been back in the day, way below basic, and I could almost get them to proficient, but I got nothing for that. I got no credit for that whatsoever. And the state said, you know what? That's important. If we grow kids, that's what we want to celebrate. And so they have added the school value added growth score. First, really big success for classroom teachers in our accountability system. There are several, so I'm going to point them out as we go. Your third indicator is what they call the SQSS. Sometimes people get the Q in the wrong place. Just know if you hear 3 S's and a Q, this is what they mean, right? I've heard people go, SSQ, it's SQSS. It's School Quality and Student Success Score. And I'll tell you all about it, what it's made up of. High school indicators are pretty much the same. We still have weighted achievement. We still have school value added growth, and we still have the SQSS. But we've always been held accountable for something else in high school, and that is graduation rate. So we have the graduation rate is still here. You have to think about getting kids those diplomas. But here's success number 2. I was a high school administrator for a little while. And one thing that we know, high school teachers and high school administrators, is some kids, it just takes a little bit longer. And really and truly, the most important thing is that we get them the diploma. It doesn't, I mean, I'm not so upset that it took you 5 years. I'm way more proud that you walked out with a diploma versus not, right? So we worked so hard to get these kids a diploma, but some kids, it just takes a little bit longer. So they gave us credit for that. They said, we're gonna acknowledge a 5-year graduation rate as well. Because the most important part is that they got the diploma. So we're going to go through all of these things, and I'm going to show you how these points work. But at the same time, I'm going to embed your state letter grade, because this is what we want to know is how do we change that letter grade? How do we make that move? So I'm going to show you how these two things combine, our federal accountability system and the state letter grades. So weighted achievement, 35% of your letter grade, which is another success because in the past it was a lot more than 35%. It was a much bigger part of that letter grade was based on achievement. Weighted achievement is calculated for your overall ELA score. And ELA is your English language art. So if anybody's a K1 or 2 teacher, you may not be familiar with ACT Aspire data, but what they do is they take the English test, the reading test, and the writing piece, and they combine them and give you an ELA score as well. So they're going to look at ELA and they're going to look at math. The one tested area that is not here is science, but science is not off the hook. Science achievement is calculated in your letter grade. It's just not in this indicator. So let's talk about how it's weighted, okay? This is pretty important. This is what you need to know. It is on, our achievement is based on a point system. So we get points for different levels. So if you'll notice here, we get 0 points for need of support. We're used to that, right? Like those kids are in need of support. That's the lowest performing level. And we understand that. We don't get credit if kids land in that lowest group. However, this is another success. We now get half a point for kids that are close. So we get something for those kids that are almost there, which that's a big deal. And look at ready. Kids that are ready, we get 1 whole point, which I like to say is twice as many as close. You get twice the points for if a kid's ready than you do if they're close, right? Because 1 is 2 halves. It's this one. So in the chat, or if you're comfortable and feel like turning your mic off, somebody tell me that little tiny word that you see there that's got a really huge meaning here. Yeah. Or. So if we're going to work on a point system, do we want to get 1 point for kids that are exceeding, or do we want to get 1.25 points for kids that are exceeding? Well, obviously, if I'm working on a point system, I want as many points as I can get. I want the 1.25. But how do they decide? mean, they can't go through and go, oh, your school's only get 1 point. Your school's going to get 1.25. How does it work? So I'm going to show you. They're only going to look in 2 places, and they being the state. Okay, when Desi goes through here to calculate this, they're going to go through and they're going to look in 2 places. They're going to look at in need of support, and they're going to look at exceeding. So only 2 places to decide if you get 1 point or 1.25 points for your kids that are exceeding. This is the only 2 places they're going to look. So we have some scenarios here, and I want to look at this top row. And if you all get ready in the chat, I'm going to ask you some questions as we go. You're going to have to give me some numbers here. Ready? We're going to look at that top row. And I want you to tell me how many little faces you see in need of support in that top row. How many little faces right here? Okay, Pam said 5, 5. Shauna said 5. That's right. 5. There are 5 kids in need of support. So the other place they're going to look is exceeding. How many little faces do you see in exceeding? Go ahead and put it in the chat. 2. Since there are less kids exceeding than there are in need of support, you get 1 point apiece. So that whole scenario, 5 kids in need of support, less kids exceeding than there are in need of support, you only get 1 point apiece. That's a total of 2 points. So we look at the next scenario. So again, how many kids do you see in need of support this time? 3. How many kids do you see exceeding? Still 3. Since those 2 numbers are the same, 1 point apiece. So the business rules for ESSA, your federal accountability system, says if the number of kids that are exceeding is less than or equal to the number of kids in need of support, you only get 1 point. So again, only 3 here. It seems intuitive that this would be all 1.25 for all those kids, but it's not. Let me show you how this works. You see in need of support has 2 little faces. Exceeding has 5 little faces. You get 1 point for 2 of them. You only get the 1.25 for the additional 3. Does that make sense? That's the weighted credit. That's how it's weighted. It's for those that are above and beyond the number that are in need of support. So for these 5 little faces over here, you get 5.75 points. Okay, so here's my question for you in the chat again. You guys have to be ready to type. Name 1 group of students that would be helpful for us in a point system to move. I need to move them out of this group. What group of kids? Name a group of kids that would be helpful in a point system to move. Okay, Pam said ready kids. Angelica says ready kids. Anybody else see any? Here's the best part of this. There's no wrong answer. The level 2 kids, the close kids. Any other groups that you see we might need to move to get more points? What about the in need of support? If we move the in need of support kids, no matter where they go, we get more than 0. Agreed? Can y'all agree with that? So we have to move the in need of support kids, right? If we can move the close kids, Shauna said the level 2 kids, if we can move the close kids, if we can move them to ready, we get twice as many points as if they were ready than if they were close. More points, right? But here's the really interesting thing. Pam and Angelica both said ready kids. Now I want you to think about that. As classroom teachers, and you don't have to answer this, just think about it. Have we ever really thought about, we really have to move kids that are already ready? Like we spend so much time thinking about the kids that are in need of support, or maybe even the close kids. But think about that. We really and truly have to move kids that come to us already ready, and we need to move them to exceeding, which is kind of a new thought because we spend so much time thinking about the lower end, but we've got to keep those ready kids moving, and we've got to move them up as well for this point system. So kind of a trick question here when I asked you which kids do we need to move, because really if we need to move the in need of support and we need to move the close and we need to move the ready, the real answer is what? Which kids do we need to move? Somebody type in the chat. Which kids do you think we need to move? Yeah, y'all got it. We have to move all of them. We have to move them all, which is such a different concept from our old accountability system. And so that's why it's so important for teachers to see this, to understand how it works. And if you're old school and you were back there in the day, we focused on bubble kids, right? And that mentality is gone. We have to focus on all kids. All kids have to move in order to help us with this weighted achievement indicator. Okay, we're going to go on and talk about growth, because here's I really wondered when I first saw growth on there, right? How are we going to do that? How do we calculate growth? I mean, no two kids grow exactly the same in height. No two kids grow exactly the same in weight. What would make us think they're going to grow exactly the same in math, right? Like, we know, even though you may be born on the same day, your exact same age, doesn't mean you're going to grow exactly the same. So how in the world are they going to do growth? It's very interesting. Let's learn about this. This is your next big success. Do y'all remember the total weighted achievement indicator was 35% of your letter grade? So not only did the state say, you know what, growth is important, but growing kids is more important than anything. And they let it be half our letter grade. Half of your letter grade in elementary and middle is based on kids growing. So you need to know how they calculate growth. 35% at high school. And I guarantee you the only reason it's not 50% at high school was because we had to account for that graduation rate. They had to pull that graduation rate percentage somewhere. But here's the thing, at high school, it's just as significant as achievement, because we're still growing kids. As a high school administrator, we didn't give up on them till the day they walked across that stage, right? Like we grow them till we're done. So it's just as significant as achievement. So that's a big success, really, but that's a big chunk of your letter grade if you're elementary and middle. And again, it's done for English language arts. And I hope you notice that reading is in red. There's meaning behind the madness. And math. Science growth is calculated in your ESSA. It's just not here. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. K2 teachers, if you are K1 or 2, you're actually still part of this. I was doing this training one time, and one of my first grade teachers goes, well, this doesn't apply to us. We don't test ACT Aspire. But it does, because they do look back on their K1 and 2 state summative assessment, and I'll show you how and why. But here's what I want you to know. I think it's really important as a classroom teacher for us to recognize phrases and terminology that maybe some of the policymakers are using or decision makers are using, so that we have the same level of understanding. And so I want you to know that Arkansas uses what they call the value add model for growth. So when you hear value add model for growth, I'm going to teach you all about it. Here's what it looks like. Tim and Anna, these are two kids coming up in your class this upcoming year, okay? You haven't met them yet. You haven't even laid eyes on them, but they're going to be in your classroom August 15th, okay? They're in the same grade. The state already knows, before you even meet them, what Tim is expected to score in May of 2023 and what Anna is expected to score in 2023. Here's what they do. Tim's expected score there on that line, that blue line, that blue dot with the red arrow, it's determined by Tim's own historical performance. So let's pretend Tim's a fifth grader. He's going to be in fifth grade class. This is what he's expected to score in May of 2023. The dot just to the left of it would be his fourth grade score, third grade score, second grade score, which has been correlated to work out with the data. And they take that and they put it all in what they call a trajectory. The trajectory is just that line. You see that line that I drew through those dots? And then they go, okay, then at the end of this year, this is what he's expected to score. So look at Anna's trajectory. Remember, Tim and Anna are in the same grade. They're the same age. What I hope you notice is that Tim and Anna's trajectories are not the same. Those lines are not the same. Tim's line looks different than Anna's line, right? Because their expected score is only based on their own historical performance. So they're basing growth on each kid's own performance instead of the whole group as a whole. So we're going to fast forward real quick and I'm going to show you what's going to happen. We're going to pretend that we've moved ahead. We've given the May 2023 assessment. Tim's score comes back in and there's this blue dot. Look at what Tim actually did in comparison to what was expected. Does anybody know a phrase that you may have heard? It's a pretty common phrase these days that you may have heard. It could describe Tim's performance compared to that expected dot. Anybody know a phrase to describe how he actually performed compared to what was expected of him? That's kind of like an outlier. The phrase you'll hear when they talk about ESSA, this is really important. You might want to write this down. Exceeded expected growth. You heard that? So Tim exceeded expected growth because you see his expected score, but he scored higher than that. So he exceeded his expected growth because that score was supposed to represent 1 year's worth of growth for Tim. Does that make sense? But he grew a whole lot more because he outscored it. So here's what they're going to do. This is interesting information. You ready? They're going to subtract those numbers. They're going to take the expected score and they're going to subtract it from what he actually did. And they're going to get a little positive number. And they're going to put that little positive number in a spreadsheet next to Tim's state ID number. We like little positive numbers. We like big positive numbers. We like positive numbers, right? We like positive numbers because those numbers mean exceeded expected growth. You with me? I'm watching your faces. So nods and thumbs up, those kind of things are great. Okay, look at Anna. She scored exactly what was expected, which is good because she still got that year's worth of growth. But when you subtract those two numbers, what are you going to get? If she scored exactly what was expected and you subtract, we're going to get a 0. That's right. Thanks, Pam. Now, a lot of times when I tell people that, they go, oh, that's not fair because she grew. Here's what I want you to know. Probably the most important thing, and I want everybody to write this down on something because you're going to look at this here in a little bit. Mel's going to take you through this for your own school, for how to do this for your own school. A 0 for each individual kid means met expected growth. I'm sure you've heard that phrase, right? Met expected growth. A 0, meaning met expected growth for that kid, will translate to an 80 growth score. Everybody write down 80. because this is going to be really important to you. When you're talking about ESSA and you go to look at your growth score, you want to compare it to the number 80. It's not 80th percentile. It's not a percentage. It's a raw number 80. Those positives from the kids that exceeded expected growth are going to make the 80 bigger. So, for example, if your school's growth score is an 83, it means that overall your school as a whole was able to exceed expected growth because it's bigger than 80. If your school's growth score is an 80, it means overall your school was able to meet expected growth. But there's another situation that can happen. Look at this scenario. Tim comes in on the day of the test and has a really bad day. You see that, right? Tim was not able to meet expected growth. He didn't even grow as much as he did the year before, right? Like he didn't even score as high as it. He did not meet expected growth. So now when they subtract and they go to the spreadsheet, they're going to put a little negative number in there. Those little negative numbers are going to pull that 80 down. So notice Anna. Anna still grew. She didn't grow as much as what was expected of her. And she's still going to give us negative points on our growth indicator. That's how we might end up with, that's how we will end up with a overall growth score less than 80. So if your growth score is a 73, it means that your school was not able to meet expected growth. Okay, and Mel's going to take you through and show you where you're going to find all this data for your school, because it's pretty important. We need to know that, right? Now, here's the really big question. Which kids are the hardest kids to get to grow? Those kids that are already where? All kids have to grow, but some kids are already where? Exceeding. They're already so high that we've got to get them to grow even more. And a lot of times as classroom teachers, we're still focusing on those kids that are in need of support. But guess what? Your growth indicator in elementary and middle, y'all, think about this with me. Your growth indicator is 50% of your letter grade. You know who's probably causing us negative points on our growth indicator? Our exceeding kids. The kids that are already at the top, because they're really hard to get those kids to grow because they're already so high. We've really got to think about, how do you enrich that student? How do you push them to grow? How do you help them go beyond where they are? So I kind of tricked you guys. I'm going to go backwards for just a minute. I want to show you where I kind of tricked you. When we were here in this chart, I got you to tell me we had to move the kids that were in need of support. We know morally and ethically we have to move those kids. They're in need of support. It's in the title, right? We know we have to move kids that are close. We now have gone, poof, wow, we have to move kids that are already ready. Hadn't really thought about that. Something to think about. There's actually a whole nother group of kids sitting here in this chart. We also have to move kids that are already exceeding, because they're more than likely causing us negative points on our growth indicator. Who knew? Okay, so catching up. Let's think about it. Just terminology, just some language stuff that I want you to recognize when you see it, okay? Content, VAS stands for value added score. That's the terminology they use when they talk about the growth component. Content means ELA and math. It is also calculated off of the ELPA 21 for your English language proficiency. That piece is proportional to the number of students that are taking the ELPA 21. your content, VAS is proportional to the whole. So notice the terminology here: content value add score plus your English language proficiency value add score is going to give you an overall school value add score for growth. What's our number we want to relate it to? So I'm going to give you the number. Oops, I just gave it to you. Y'all give it to me. Trick question. 80. 80. We're looking for that school value added score of 80 because 80 means we met expected growth. It would be fabulous if you get on there and you go, wow, my school's value added growth score is an 83. That's great. That means your school was able to exceed expected growth. So growth score of 80 means that met expected growth. If nothing else, I want you to write that down and take that back to school, and so you know that information. Okay, SQSS, the school quality and student success score, it is 15% of your letter grade. So it's a little piece. The most significant piece is your growth for elementary and middle, right? More significant than anything, which thank you. That's what we do. We grow kids. But I want you to know, and about telling on people, but when I started doing this training for administrators, this very first one really threw a lot of people into a tizzy. They went, whoa, wait a minute. I can't be responsible for that. And yeah, we needed to be responsible for it. We learned a lot from it being part of our accountability system, but I want you to know, as a classroom teacher, you're probably going to see something different. They saw student engagement, they being administrators, and they automatically knew it was attendance. Classroom teachers, we live with our evaluation system, tests, right? And when we see student engagement, we think about Charlotte Danielson's work 3C. You with me? When you hear people talk about student engagement and they're talking about ESSA, they're talking about attendance in school. Are kids coming to school? And I get it. I understand that, because if kids are not coming to school, they're probably not engaged in that activity that you're doing with your kids, right? Like, they're just not. Your kids don't come to school. So they base it on your school calendar. They look at the number of kids that are absent less than 5% of your school calendar days, kids that are absent between 5 and 10%, and kids that are absent more than 10%. And so administrators kind of went, whoa, wait a minute. And we did some attendance audits with a lot of schools, and we learned a lot. By having this as part of our accountability system, we realized that we really truly could do some things that helped kids make it to school. We had to do an attendance audits. So you may have been pressured 4 or 5 years ago. You might have started hearing, listen, your attendance records have to be done and they have to be accurate, and you've got to do it immediately. Like, you may have heard a lot of pressure put on you, and it was valid. And it was because we were going through doing all these attendance audits going, wait a minute, we've got to figure out who these kids are. We've got to figure out why they're missing school. And we've got to figure out, is there something we can do to fix it or to help get them in school? We know we have to have kids in school. So student engagement is part of your SQSS. Science achievement. Here's your science achievement. Back to the old school scoring. Either you passed it, which means you scored ready or exceeding, or you didn't. So you get a point if they pass it, you get nothing if they don't. A lot of times people will go, well, wait a minute, why isn't it there in the achievement? Well, science teachers will tell you very quickly, the reason they don't do well on the science assessment is typically because they can't read it. The science assessment is written on grade level. So just so you know, science achievement is here. It's in the SQSS. So it's a piece of that 15% of your letter grade. Science growth is also here. And this is based on percentiles. So for kids that score below the 25th percentile in the growth, you get 0 points, which that's low, and we get it. but between 25th and 75th percentile is half a point. So that's a big span where we get half a point. And then kids above that 75th percentile, you get 1 point. And notice there's that red reading word again, reading at grade level. Now, middle has one additional thing, and it's only for middle schools if you're classified as a middle. And I think Mel's going to show you the different grade charts, grade level charts, maybe. Can't remember. I think we talked about it. But if your middle school is classified as a middle and it has 9th grade in it, like your high school's 10 through 12, then it would include on-time credits. But if you don't have 9th grade in middle school, right? Like if you're not giving credits at that grade level, that doesn't apply. So that's only if applicable. Now, high school people, here's what you're going to see. The font is going to get really, really small. There's a lot of things in the high school SQSS. Still 15% of the letter grade, but look how little. Still student engagement, still science achievement, science growth, and reading at grade level. They're going to pull all your seniors, and you're going to get a point for every senior that was ever able to score a 19 or higher on the ACT. They're going to pull all your seniors, and they're going to look for college benchmark readiness, which for reading is a 22. If they've ever scored that sub score on the ACT of a 22 in reading, 22 in math, or a 23 in science. That's what they're looking for. On-time credits, they only pull them for 9th, 10th, and 11th. And the department bases it on 5.5 credits per year. So at the end of the 9th grade, every 9th grader that ended up with 5.5 credits, at least, you get a point. Every 10th grader with 11, and every 11th grader with 16.5. They're going to pull all your seniors, and they're going to look for a final GPA of a 2.8 or higher. That is non-weighted. So if you weight them for AP or anything like that, it's counselors do these. They have to do a non-weighted GPA and a weighted GPA, so they know when they say non-weighted which GPA they're looking for. They're going to pull all your seniors, and they're looking to see if your seniors have ever experienced in their high school a rigorous course. So any senior that has ever had an AP class, an international baccalaureate class, or a concurrent credit class, at least one. They only count, each kid only counts one for 1 point. So they just have to have at least one of those experiences somewhere in their high school. They may have had all AP or all concurrent, right? But they still only count that one time. That's a great question, Pam. I don't think I've ever been asked that. My immediate assumption is pass. They have to have credit. Yeah. But that's a good question. That makes me want to go check the business rules, and I will do that here in a minute because that's a great question. Computer science credit, they're going to pull all seniors. If they have that computer science credit, you get a point. And community learning service credit. There are certain courses that are listed at the department that count as a community learning service credit. And if you have one that's not on that list, there is a process that you can go through to see if you can get it added. But you need to make sure you've checked that list and that you have it coded correctly. Okay. So graduation rate, I want you to know this. This is for high school only. Obviously, this is where it counts into that. To determine your 4-year and 5-year cohort, they go back to the first time they were a freshman. So first time 9th graders in 2019, if they're still in school, they're part of that 5-year cohort. If they were a first time 9th grader in 2020, they're part of that 4-year cohort at the end of this year, right? So you can see how that works. And that is 15% of your letter grade. I don't know why that's not on there. On that slide, should be on that slide. That's 15% of your letter grade. It's on another slide in the future here. But if you'll remember, I told you guys that reading was there in red. So another thing I'm going to tell on administrators for. When I was doing this training with administrators, sometimes some of them would come up and they'd go, hey, can you just look at my data and tell me what my school needs to focus on? And really and truly, it's the same for everybody. If you notice here for elementary and middle, weighted it, this is 100% of your letter grade. 35% of your letter grade for weighted achievement includes reading. 50% of your letter grade for your school value added growth includes reading. 15% of your school quality and student success score included that reading at grade level. They use the reading assessment to determine reading at grade level. So 100% of your letter grade, all the indicators, each one of those indicators include reading. So my answer was probably want to focus on reading growth. So you may have started about 5 years ago really doing some school-wide reading things. You might have started having some school-wide reading programs. You might have, and we've seen the move to the science of reading. Probably want to focus on reading growth. We know if we're growing in reading, more kids will be achieving. And we know if we're growing in reading and we're achieving in reading, we're more than likely feeling better in school. We're going to come to school and we're probably going to graduate. Oh, good. Thanks, Mel, for looking that up. She answered the question. She said credits are set up in eSchool so students earning a D or better are awarded credits on their transcript. Good, good, good. And that's what it takes to get that 1 point. Look at high school. This is a mind blower for high school people, okay? I was a high school math teacher for 16 years, and I can remember like 15 years ago when my administrator came to me and she said, you are all reading and writing teachers. And I remember thinking, actually, I teach math. Because that was a really weird concept for me as a high school teacher. And it's a hard thing for us to really comprehend. But she was right. And we focused on school-wide reading and we focused on school-wide writing, no matter what course, what content you taught. And look here at the data here on this slide. Again, reading is part of everything. We are all reading and writing teachers, and we do have to all focus on reading. I honestly thought that the senior English teacher next door to me, I thought she was responsible for reading. And you know what I've learned? High school teachers don't know how to teach reading. K1 and 2 are people that come out of college equipped to teach reading, right? Kindergarten, first and second grade. So we've all had to learn. We've all had to learn how to include morphology. We've all had to learn how to get reading across all content areas or literacy across all content areas. And so it's just been a big eye opener and an aha thing. So if you're a high school person and your administrators has come through and said, listen, you're all reading teachers. That's actually very accurate. We are all reading. We all need kids to be able to read. It never occurred to me that I had kids sitting in pre-calculus that struggled reading, and I did. It's real. So that's a very accurate thing to hear. It's hard for us in high school because we have to learn how to address those things as high school teachers that have been focused on content. Okay. So right now, for this part of this, do you have any lingering questions about anything that I've shared with you, or any aha moments that you don't mind sharing with the group about maybe why you're doing something that you didn't know you were doing, or maybe anything you want to share?
So guys, I'm going to transition into actually doing a demonstration for you. But I know if you're like me, you want to know, am I going to have these steps? So Gina, you can show them. All of the steps are outlined in our presentation, and we put a link to the presentation that we're doing in the chat box. So you can go grab or snag or whatever you call the link there so that you actually have our PowerPoint presentation. And then within the PowerPoint presentation, we have linked a document that's printer friendly. Why don't you click on that for them?
This one right here, click here to link this to the steps.
Yep. So there's a printer friendly version, and I've also directly linked that shared Google Doc with you. I've tried to make it 8 steps, but instead of trying to do that right now and learn along with me the functionality, if you'll trust me that I've tested my steps, they work, and you can print them and you can have them then to access later. But I want to be able to show you and us all look at it at the same time so that you're able to do it. So this is like the demonstration piece. So I'm going to share my screen, Gina. I think it's going to make you stop share. Yay. So in the steps that are out there, it's real simple. I'm going to take you to a resource that the state has called My School Info. You've probably heard it. It has lots of different things in it, but what I'm going to do is try to show you 2 examples of reports. One's elementary, one's high school, because they do look a little different, because Gina taught you why they look a little different. Like Gina, I want you to be able to interrupt me if you have questions. I would love, love, love for this to be interactive. If you have a question that I don't cover as you're looking at one of these example reports, ask me about it. And there's probably things that I can't answer. But this right here, My School Info, there's 12 ways to get to this, but I've linked it into that document for you. So if you click on that, it's a link that's live and it should take you directly out here. This is a state system. And it's real simple. The steps that I have I'm going to follow these steps, but they're outlined as step 1 through 8. But most importantly, I want to quickly go through it and show you how to access a report that you can then repeat that process for your own school or schools. I noticed some of you are district people. I think I saw Pam. Pam, you may want to look at that for various schools. Yeah. So I'm going to pick on my guinea pigs, my Springdales, which I love dearly, and I know they wouldn't care. But I'm going to start with George Elementary. What I'm sharing with you is public information. So, you know, your grandma or grandpa can pull this up if they knew how. It's all out there. It's public information. It's been redacted to protect student confidentiality. And notice as I start typing what happens. I don't know LEAs, let's say. I just know the name of the school. Well, there's 2 George. There happens to be 2 George schools at Springdale, but I'm interested in the elementary. So I select the one that I want. LEA number appears, and I go over to this green magnifying glass, and that is what launches it forward for that particular school. And then it's a dashboard. It just gives you a little bit of info, but what you want to remember on how to get to this ESSA report, which is the goal of my 8 steps, is go down here, and this is hyperlinked again, the name of the school with their address, select George Elementary. And now we get yet another dashboard. So we've gone 2 levels deep into My School Info, and we're there. The first thing you want to do, and let's do this in case you mess up. Let's say I messed up and I went to the wrong George. Get up here and hit that search button. That was real important when I first started using this system. So then go back and just do it again. Go grab the right George. I was in the right one, but I wanted to show you that. Okay, link 2 levels deep to get back into it. This will work for you. Then the most important thing to know is we do not yet have an ESSA report for this school year. ESSA is always a little lagging, so it comes out in the fall, and it's a story about what happened the year before. So if your academic year that we just concluded, which is the 21-20, so weird saying that, 21-22 school year, then this fall in October, you'll have a new report, an ESSA report for the 21-22 school year. But since we're not there yet, we're in the middle of the summer, we're going to have to glance back 1 year. So we'll change that year to 2021 for our example, so we can get familiar with the reports. These little tabs here, I talk about them on one of the steps. One's a general information landing piece. It just gives you some information about the particular school LEA campus that you're looking at. The stats, you can explore them. It's like per pupil expenditures, their race, ethnicity, makeup, just kind of general information. This one I love. The school rating one is like an at a glance page of accountability. And if you, Gina did talk to you about letter grades, and they were suspended last year just due to the pandemic, but they'll come back. And when they do, this is where you also see your letter grade performance in here. And it gives you a lens of how to look at it against a different comparison, like state average performance. Now, on to reports. This is where you find your school ESSA report. So it's the 4th tab over that says report. It's an ESSA report, ESSA school index. You go all the way to the right and you drop the arrow down because it's either expanded or collapsed. So when you drop it down, it's going to bring up a dynamic version of your school ESSA index report, okay? And the neat thing about this dynamic one is you can interact with it in pieces. So right now we're looking at the overview, which is the front part of the report. If you wanted to just drill down, you could drop down this box and just look at the weighted achievement dynamically on your screen, or the school value added growth component, or the school quality. But I'm going to assume that you want to export it and print it if you're like me, because it's a pretty large report and it's very good. Office of Innovation has done a really good job at creating a very nice interactive report, as well as one to print. So if you do an export PDF, most all of us have access to free Acrobat Adobe Reader on our machines nowadays. So when you export it, it can read any PDF. So you'll just hit that and boom, it'll drop down into your download file, and then you'll have a complete version of the ESSA report. Now, having said that, I've already downloaded the reports, and I'm going to move our pictures around, maybe. Move us around so I can get the reports pulled up. Okay, can everybody still see my screen?
We can.
Okay. For the purposes of learning about the content of the reports, we're going to start out with an elementary school. And Gina mentioned I might show you this. It just kind of depends on your grade configurations, but there's 3 big buckets of how you're held accountable. You're either an elementary level, a middle level, or high school level. So there is data out there, and I may find it if we have time at the end to drop out there, or maybe Gina can, on grade configurations. George Elementary happens to teach grades K through 5 in all their elementaries, and that's considered one of the elementary level, but they're only compared to the statistics and data of their peers that are also held as a elementary level. High schools nearly always have graduation rates, but not in every case. And so it just kind of depends on the grade configuration as to which performance level and cut scores are used to determine your letter grade. But anyway, given that, I want just to take a peek here at an elementary school that I'm using as an example. It gives you on this particular landing page, the very first overview, it tells you how they performed in their overall ESSA index score. And Gina talked to you about that, about what all makes up that score. But this one gives you a really quick look at how the state performed and then how you're performing relatively to that. So that's a really good piece of information. Another thing that I love about this overall view of the beginning piece is it gives the graphic charts and tells you where your score falls 2 ways. One, in this little barometer, it reminds me of a car speedometer, an old car speedometer, I guess, as to how you're performing against state performance. And then it breaks the state distribution of overall index scores for all elementaries out. And you can then look at your 74.14 and see how you're performing relative to the state that way. So 2 different ways of looking at that. The neat thing about this very first landing page, and this is true if your school's been open at least 3 years, it gives you trend data on the overview page based upon the different federal reporting categories. Now, federal reporting categories for our state are the all students, the Black or African American subpopulation of students, Hispanic, white, economically disadvantaged, your English learners, and students with disabilities. But we may have students with other ethnicities or demographics, but these are the federal ones that are large enough in our state that we're held accountable to report on them as a state. Notice also the color coding. Gray, black, orange. Gray represents the 2018 school year. Black represents the 2019 school year, meaning the year that the test occurred. And then 21 is the most recent year. So this is the data of achievement from the 2021 school year. The orange is the most recent. Notice there's one missing. The 20 year. That was the year that the pandemic hit us at the end of March, I believe, and the federal tests were suspended for all states. So there is no summative achievement test, Aspire as y'all know it, for that year. But you still have trend data. You still have 3 years of data for 2020. So if I'm going through here and you have any questions, I want you to stop me. These are just index scores based upon how each subpop is performing over time. specifically a 3-year window of test data, 4-year calendar window, if you think about it. Now, I love this chart. I didn't understand it at first, but I thought I would show it to you. Every school campus has one of these graphic displays here, and they have meaning. So O stands for overall ESSA score, A for achievement, the weighted achievement specifically, G for value added growth, and Q for school quality, if you think of it that way. And they kind of are incremental in that they show you relative to each other what these indexes look like, because each of those categories gets an individual index calculation. Overall, of course, is made up of the other 3, but it lets you see the areas that Gina taught you about earlier that count 50% of your overall story, or 35% of your overall story, or 15%, which was school quality. It lets you see which of those particular score areas might be considered deficiencies for yourself. So if you look at this one, the strong one in this particular school, the K-5 George Elementary, is growth. Their greatest score in their overall index is coming from the greatest score in the value-added growth for that building. Okay. And the one that might have the greatest need to improve on is the school quality. We'll talk about that in a minute. If this were a high school, I do need to point out, because some of you are secondary educators with that lens on. If there were high school, you would have graduation rates in here. You'd have the graduation rate piece as well. Okay. So what I want to talk to you about is your value added growth score. Gina kind of touched on this. She told you to write down and remember a really important number. It was a magic number of 80. Anything below indicates, anything below an 80 indicates that students are losing ground compared to their expected growth and achievement. She did a really good job covering that. School quality, these scores are a percentage of points earned. I kind of wanted to talk about that since I pointed out that that was an area that could be improved on. High schools can actually have 11 components in them. Elementaries don't have near that many, but we are going to tag it in between starting this report and ending it so you can see what that kind of looks like. So this chart is really good. As we move on, this is a chart where there is weighted achievement graphed against value-added school growth. And you'll see this appear on more than one page. This particular page is talking specifically in the category of weighted achievement. Again, over here is the dashboard. It shows you what this campus performed at compared to the state performance. They exceeded it, 59.66 weighted achievement versus state performance at the elementary levels of 52.2. But this is a little plot. Gina, you may need to correct me as a math teacher, scattergram plot of all the elementaries in our state. And this is a quadrant chart, if you think about it. And on the left side, bottom corner, these are school systems in the elementary grade span that had performance that was low in achievement as well as growth, meaning they didn't hit that 80 mark. See this 80 down here that Gina talked about? That's that magic number of meeting expected growth for a year. So the schools over on this side did not quite make it there. Up here is the state performance somewhat of 52.2. Gina, I think we decided that wasn't the case.
It's not.
For the achievement. But up here in
this
this,
70, they have it at 75.
I think they have adjusted that line for higher achievement to be reported out as 70, maybe around 70 up here. But if you're in this category up here, you're still not growing and meeting that expected growth of 80. But you may actually have some high performing students. And if you remember, Gina talked to you about those kids that you need to move. It's important to be thinking about the kids that are already performing high, that you're moving them forward as well and growing them as well. So this might be a situation where a school system had some high performing kids that didn't grow and meet their growth trajectory this past year. Over here on the right side, I call this the positive side of the quadrant chart. Up here is what you're aiming for. These are high performing schools and schools that also contain students that met their growth trajectories in clusters that are calculated for the school. Right here, this little black dot represents the school we're looking at as our example school. They may not have the achievement yet, but they grew their kids. And I want you to look, if 80 was expected, and that gets aggregated together for all the kids in that particular school system, looky here. They really, really got some pluses in their spreadsheet, as Gina talked about, because on average, the value added growth score for our example campus is 90 something points. So that's huge.
And Mel, if you notice, there are only 3 elementary schools that have higher growth scores than 90 than George Elementary, only 3.
Yeah. And so I know that they would love for them to be achieving at that performance level that's high, but you got to get there first. You got to grow, and boy, they're getting close. And the more kids that you can show clustered over here, that's more kids that you're meeting the growth on. And that is going to be an upward trend movement, like Gina showed you in her little spreadsheet. Moving the kids, moving the faces, you need to move all kids. That's huge. At the bottom of this value added growth score is your kind of your state distribution comparison graphic. Again, this is a state comparison. So if you remember up here, state had 52.2, and this particular school we're looking at had 59.66. So they fall right here in this bar, the 5560 bar of the state distribution, just to kind of give you an example. And that is only compared to the other schools that are configured as elementary level. I'm going pretty quick because I want us to have time for questions. Right here, this is a chart that represents the graphics that we just looked at. These are performance levels, and Gina talked about them. The lowest performance level that ACT Aspire uses is in need of support, with 0 points credited for that level. Close is the next one. Ready and exceeds are those that we consider proficient. And she did an amazing job explaining that 1.25 weighted component. If the number of students, and Gina covered that, is not greater than the number of students, if the number of students in the exceeding is not greater than the number in the lowest category, you don't get the credit for them. And Gina, let me tell you what I learned. They combine the content scores together.
To total points.
Yeah, before they award that weighted credit, it's not exclusive of because look, we had 23 students exceeding in math and 21 in the bottom, but it's combining them together. So we only received the 1.0 for them because they add those two together before they apply the weighted piece. And so that was something I had to get refreshed on a little bit. But they show you transparently how they calculate. And here's something I need to point out. Weighted achievement is based on your non-mobile students. Your final calculation is based on your non-mobile students. So we'll talk a little bit on the next screen about that. I think that's a little bit better. Okay, one thing I wanted to point out here on this screen when we get to that, full academic year and highly mobile are both components of how many kids you're expected to test, but the calculations that get reported on your weighted achievement is on the full academic year only. Let me tell you how this might have impacted you in the past year. Usually it's not an issue for school campuses to test 95% of all students. But during the pandemic, it might have been a little bit bigger challenge to get kids to come up and take that test. And so we have what's known as an adjusted denominator. If you didn't test 95% of your students that were expected, the state automatically did a calculation to adjust that denominator up to 95%. Percent tested is an all students calculation, both non-mobile and mobile. And I keep using that term lightly. Y'all, a highly mobile student is someone that enrolls after October 1. So your full academic year are your non-mobile kids or the kids that are with you on or before October 1. That's a federal definition. So it gives you a little perceptive of that. This N being less than 10, like why do we have an N there? I'm just trying to take information and share it with you and not assume if you already know that, that's great. But we have federal reporting guidelines that will not allow data to be reported if the population metric is less than 10, fewer than 10, because it would be easy to figure out who those students are. So when this report becomes a public report, like the one I'm showing you, that gets redacted or represented this way, that the size of the number there is smaller than 10. So it would be, if you have a private view through ESSA, you would actually be able to see the actual numbers there. Okay, let's look at the next chart. This is like, I love this chart. I'm going to show you this with George Elementary, but then I'm going to pivot to a high school that has an even more interesting takeaway. So this is your school value added growth score plotted against weighted achievement, but it's in a graphic way. And I call this the graphic report for subgroup performance or subpopulation performance, which is equally important depending on how many subpops you have. It's a visual graphic to see gaps in subpop performance. So each of these little geometric figures represents a subpop. If you notice here at Georgia Elementary, we have some outliers. I noticed one of you used that word. We have some outliers. Our white students are up here in the high achievement, higher growth category. And down here, our students with disabilities are at the lowest, but they are in the higher growth quadrant, which is really good. And then we have a clustering right here of a lot of different subpopulations, including our English learners. You can't tell it, but the economically disadvantaged diamond is behind that, and the Hispanic Latino, and then the all student population. But this is a really good report for you to be able to see subpopulation report, performance and discrepancies in a visual of which population may need some attention as you're plotting for how to move that needle forward next year. Now, Gina, I'm going to pop over now. I'm going to pop over and grab my high school report because I think there's a lot of relevance here. We're going to fast forward in this high school report. It happens to be one of my campus schools that I worked with a lot. I'm going to go to the same page I was on for this high school report and let you see this. This is a high school that has one tested grade in it. It's a 10, 11, 12, but it would look very similar if it was a high school with 8, 12 in it, okay, or 7, 12. But either way, I wanted you to look at this dynamic and look what a different story this one tells. It shows that my white students were not, on average, they didn't meet their expected growth. Remember Gina talking to you about that? This is just doing a calculation and a visual report for every one of them based on their subpopulation that they're associated with, okay? So this lets you look at it with just like a microscope lens of instead of all students, how are we looking? All is the circle, but how are we looking if we only look at how the white Caucasian students are performing, special ed, students with disabilities, our English learners, were they growing? Yes, they were. I'm really proud to see how we grew our students with disabilities in that 21 year. The diamond represents economically disadvantaged. So all of our very challenging subpops appear to have met or exceeded expected growth, the way Gina talked about it. But some of our all students didn't. And who are they? What can y'all tell me? Which subpopulation? Okay, chat box time. It's time to wake up. Let's get in the chat box. Here's what I want you to give me on this. I'm going to ask you a series of questions and y'all pop it in the chat. Which subgroup showed the greatest growth? Perfect, Pam. Which subgroup showed the greatest achievement based on this chart? That's right. Good job, guys. Which sub-pop or subgroup, I tend to call them sub-pops, which subgroup showed the least amount of growth? Which subgroup? Good job, Lauren. Good job, guys. How many sub-pops met or exceeded expected growth? And you can count the all as a sub-pop. Good job. Good job. I mean, technically all includes the sub-pops, but 4 did. And it's these 4 here at the bottom: the Hispanic sub-pop, the economically disadvantaged, the English learners. That's huge. That's huge. I mean, it's huge if we have everybody meeting or exceeding their growth. But this was really telling. This was, I'm sure this was very telling to the leadership there, that particular sub-pop did not grow compared to what was expected of them when they looked at all of their individual trajectories that Gina told you about. They calculated all their individual little value-added scores. They fell short. Their blue dot was below their trajectory line. And so that's a concern. Okay, let's move on. This right here, I'm going to close the chat box for just a minute. Gina, if you'll watch the chat box.
Got it.
This right here just gives you trend data, a trend. Let me define that like I did restricted value and not assume we all know everything that we're talking about. So this may be my definition, but a trend is defined by me as movement in a common direction, upward and downward. So I need at least 2 data points, 2.5 to 3 data points for me to say I have a trend. I think we call trends in our state, when we look at most reports that the state produces for us, that we need 3 years of data to have a trend. Okay. So looking at this data, this shows the 3-year weighted achievement broken out by subpopulation. So here's all of the kiddos, and then here they are broken out based upon their subpopulation. Here's something I should point out. Sometimes a student who is, of course, all students are in this category. Okay. All non-mobile students are in this category. But I may be an African-American student and also be economically disadvantaged and may also be a special ed. So I may count in all 3 of those subpops. I may be a white student that is an English learner that is affiliated with the white race, also economically disadvantaged. I may be a Hispanic student that is not an English learner, and I may be in this category. There's just all different ways for you to see. But what Gina was telling you is when they look at subpopulation performance, if you move that happy face, Gina, is that what you call it? That student's face. Sometimes you're not just moving it in the all students. Sometimes you're moving it in multiple subpops as well. And that is another component in ESSA, is how well are your subpops performing? So there's nothing masked. You don't want to ever think things are going great, but then when you look at an individual subpopulation, you see that there is a very underserved subpop or 1 or more subpops. Okay. So this is broken out by your subpopulations on achievement.
And this is the high school, right?
Oh, yeah. And remember, they only have 1 tested grade. I'm sorry, I've got a little delay. I didn't mean to make y'all dizzy. I want to ask you a question about this. Which subpop shows a declining trend in student performance? Pop that one in the chat. Which subpop shows a declining trend in student performance? Now, trend means you got to look at more than 1 data point. So look across the years. Good job. Good job, guys. Yes. So if we look at that, that's a good way to be thinking about multiple cohorts of kids having that identified over 3 years. But our English learner subpop has declined over 3 years when you look at that in this particular example. That's a really good one. Okay, we're not going to get real deep in analyzing data, but I just thought I'd help. We just do a few of those together. This chart breaks it down even further. It takes, now these levels mean something. These are performance levels. So this is level 1 is considered how many of the full academic year, see that full academic year, that's the non-mobile kiddos that you had all year long, and they're part of your story for achievement. How many of those students fell into the level 1 category, which was in need of support? How many fell into level 2, which was close? How many fell into level 3, which was ready, and level 4 from ELA? And same for math. So this just breaks this down for you and gives you this data. When the number again is fewer than 10, it's going to be protected here as a restricted value. Okay. Let's move on. You've seen this chart before. They give you a little bit more data of the chart. This is the school value added growth again, plotted against the weighted achievement scores. Okay, but this is that high school. So my black dot is in a different spot now. Remember my elementary example, it was way up here in the 90. And we all noted that. So in the high school one, it's still a celebration. We are experiencing higher growth on average for the students in that school system, but just barely. We just barely met expected growth. And we know now, after analyzing their data, which subpop may have kept this dot closer to this line. Which was it? Do you remember? Which subpop in our high school example was an underperforming subpopulation? Anybody remember? It was our white. It sure was. So this kind of lets us look at it collectively again, reinforcing everything Gina taught you. As you scroll down on this page, you get the distribution and you get to see it across state performance. And then this at the bottom, I want you to know, sometimes they spill onto 2 pages. And here's an example. The data components that make up these charts above spill over onto 2 pages here. So you get your value added score broken out by subject. So here's the ELA. Here's the math value added content score. Here's the combined content score. And then here's the English language proficiency score. And this is determined by ACT Aspire, typically right here, ELA and math to get your growth. It is determined by Aspire, for growth. ELP comes from your ELPA test. That's your language proficiency test. And so these numbers don't always match, meaning for some reason a kiddo may miss the day, miss some of the pieces of the ELA test score. That's why we see a little bit of difference in the number of kids that actually was able to have a growth score. They also have to have 2 data points to have a growth score. So if you think about it, they may have moved in and they only have 1 data point for something. ELP is your English learners, and that's given in K-12. The growth score for English language proficiency comes actually from grades 1 through 11 is how they compute growth. 1 through 12. And then they combine it to get an overall growth score. So if you have a child who's taking the Aspire assessment for ELA and math as well as ELPA, they're going to have multiple ways to have their individual value added score computed. They get credit for growing language as well as content. And that, if we go any deeper, Gina, that's a whole other training, I feel like. Okay. I'll say this, I don't know how many of you have English learners. I'm very familiar with working with English learners. So I wanted to tell you about the counts for your ELP growth on the next page. These give you the number counts. They also down here at the bottom by subpop give you the counts for English language proficiency growth. Your students that have 2 data points in ELPA get credited for growth. They have to have 3 years in the US in your system to be able to have an achievement score. But as far as your growth for ELPA, if they have 2 years, they do. If they're a recent arrival, they don't count either way. Okay. They have to have at least 2 years of data before they're factored into your ESSA story. All right, we're going to move on. I'm just going to point out one thing on this page. This is that great chart again that we looked at. It comes forward in a lot of different ways. Each one has a little bit different pieces of data that they give you. Down here is the school value added growth score broken out by individual subpopulation performance. I do want to point out that the numbers of students must be fewer than 10, or we would have seen a growth score calculated for the Black or African American population. Okay. And that's why this chart is missing right here, because we do not have 10 or more students at this particular campus of that demographic background to report on. But it does let you have the trend data performance as well on growth. So you're actually able to see which populations of students may not be growing. We already knew that that was our white population that we were experiencing that with. So we're going to move on past that.
Look at that growth, Mel, for students with disabilities.
I know, I'm so proud of that. And remember, y'all, they were this little plus sign right here, that of all the students,
Look at the trend.
you have all the sub pops in that school system, they grew students with disabilities the most.
Scroll down and look at the trend for that too.
And when you think about that, the way Gina taught you that is they all had a trajectory. They all exceeded it. They got a plus. Like they went beyond their individual growth trajectories. And when they all got calculated and aggregated together for that school system, as a school, that sub pop exceeded expectations on average for all their special ed kids.
Now, Shauna just asked, definition for who was included didn't change, did it?
It's still non-mobile for growth. Is that it, the question you're asking? And they only have grade 10 in this particular school. I know that. So they got credited for all 10th graders that took the test.
They're different years, so they would be different 10th graders.
Mm-hmm. But it says something about the program in that school system. Because they're growing students with disabilities beyond what's expected. So the expected was that school has a transition between 9th and 10th grade. So they left another campus at the end of 9th grade with an expectation to perform this way, and they exceeded it. So I'm pretty proud to see that coming out of a pandemic after a transition from one campus to another. That's like a really good thing. Okay, let's keep going. I want to go on and show you and again, these are lovely reports. They will eat a lot of trees. I just want you to know they're beautiful in color. They're PDFs, so you can look at them on your phone or your iPad. They're kind of small, but you can see them. This is, if you're a high school with grade 12, you'll have a page in here that shows graduation rates. And recently, we added in the 5-year graduation rate, which just gives us another data point to report on. Shows you how the state was performing and whether or not this particular campus was performing equal to the state. They weren't in the 4-year graduation rate, and they fell short in the 5-year as well. Our state average performance in graduation rates is really high, y'all. And so it's a high bar, but it's still a bar. And basically, the first time you're a 9th grader, they expect you to finish 4 years from that to be considered on time. And this is a whole other process of data that goes in. Any of you familiar with district data, Pam may be, it goes in with your cycle report, usually in August. So you get credit for any kid that completes summer work. They allow you that summer thing. Another thing about graduation rates is they're lagging. So your achievement data is based on one school year, 21-22, but your graduation rate data, if you're a high school, is based upon the previous year. That is so that we do get the benefit of that summer catch up and reporting piece that happens in August. And then they give you a chance to cleanse that data a little bit and perfect it, and then it gets used in the next ESSA report, but it's always lagging a year behind. I'm proud to see that we do have a 5-year credit. So all kids that complete the 4-year are included in the graduation data set for 5-year, plus those that finished in 5-year that didn't in 4. So it's pretty good. This year, this is like the year they became 9th graders. Okay. The 2016 cohort, that was their on-time 9th grade year. And look, the state's doing pretty good in graduation rate. The feds want us to be at this 2/3, and we're pretty much there. But you can look at this data and break it out by sub-pop and see if you have a sub-pop that is not achieving graduation the same as others and address that. Moving on, Gina, how am I doing on time? I'm still doing okay.
We have 19 minutes.
Okay, so this is one of the main reasons I shifted to a high school ESSA report for you, was so you could see that there's, gosh, Gina, what, 3 times as many indicators for secondary schools as there are for elementary in that 15% school quality calculation. I just kind of want to go over them with you. They're pretty straightforward. Gina talked about this. You have X number of points. And this particular campus had a total possible points that could have been awarded of 8,464. And you go, Lord, what is that? Well, they have a lot of kids, first of all, and they offer a lot of things that can count in the numerator. So let's talk about all those 11 different things that make this up. And that's how they end up calculating. It's a math formula. It's a fraction. This is how many points that were available in all the SQSS components for that high school. And they took away 4470. So that's how they come up with that score. And we'll just move forward through a few. Now, Gina, if you want to stop me, it's a lot of points. It's a lot of kids, but remember, it's 15% of your overall ESSA index, which is then correlated. Those cut scores are then correlated to award you letter grades for the state. But they're important. It's very important. This first school quality indicator chart just simply breaks down the overall index by sub-pop. That's it. It's sub-pop summaries and trend data over time. Then we get a little deeper. We go down a little bit deeper. Now we look at school level student engagement. And like Gina said, for ESSA, that's attendance. So looky here. This is basically how points are awarded. If you're a student and you had 10 or more consecutive days of enrollment, that's the business rule on that, then you can either get a 0, a 0.5, or a 1.0 for how your attendance was reported through eSchool. Okay, so it's real important to have accurate reporting. It's even more important for kids to come to school. If a student is there all year and they have missed less than 5% of their enrollment days, they'll get the full point. That's what we want. If they've been there even half a year, whatever the number of days they're enrolled, and they're somewhere in that range between 5 to 10%, you're only going to get a half a point for them. If they're not coming to school, they're not participating in instruction, and they're not there to benefit from any of the programs that you have. So this is a huge one. This is a really important one. Let's look at this. This is done for grades K through 11, and it is your all students. I want you to know the decision rules on student engagement are a little bit different than all the other ESSA components. They are based upon everybody, as long as they had 10 or more consecutive days of enrollment in your system. So yes, that means I could count in multiple campuses. I could if they move around a lot. I love this next chart. This one right here lets you visually look at your campus's percentage of students and determine who has chronic absenteeism, meaning they got 0 points. And the yellow, it's like a red, it's like a stoplight. It lets you know, well, who's at risk, who's not there most of the attendance days that they're enrolled, who's got patterns developing of moderate risk, who has high risk. And look at this. So surprisingly, the subpopulation that we saw the greatest growth has some of the least amount of risk, but then ironically, our white population of students who we saw the least amount of growth on also shows that they had the least amount of risk. Most of the kids were engaged by the definition of engagement from attendance records. Gina, anything you want to take away from that chart that I missed on that?
Well, that just makes me think about, as an administrator, I'm thinking they're coming to school, but they're not growing.
I know that one really troubles me.
Yeah.
I think it's on us to know who they are, who those students are, to create some programs to reward kids that are there and create programs to help support kids that aren't and why they're not coming. There's lots of reasons. That's a whole other workshop on what factors into student engagement. But just to let you know, this is based on your school and this is your all students. So this is a K-11 data set, even though they may not have an academic test to go along with it. Okay.
Well, this is high school, so it's a 10, 11, 12.
Yeah, they don't do 12. 12
Yeah,
is
10, 11
yep.
for attendance.
Senioritis kicks in pretty early, I guess.
Mhm.
So Gina was emphasizing this, reading at every level. It's even at the high school level. Look at this. So here is their grade level reading score. This is based on non-mobile students. So they're not looking at a kid that moved in March here. Not that you shouldn't look at kids that move in March, but they are telling your story based upon kids you had an opportunity to impact a full instructional year, a full academic year. Lots of opportunity for some points here. Only about half the kids, even less than half, earn points at being able to be on grade level in reading. So when you see this impacts achievement. It always does. I put a little thing in the chat box that kids learn to read at K2 and then they read to learn in the years beyond that. And I'm not a reading teacher, but I was a high school administrator, and guys, they can't access content if they can't read. And so it has it's a common theme throughout everything, like Gina showed you in her training.
And I think that's really, really powerful to help with us with high school mindsets to really see less than half our kids are reading at grade level. Like, that's a shock, right? Like, helps you understand why we all have to help support the reading across the content areas.
And it's kind of pronounced in some of the sub-pops at this particular school, very pronounced. And sometimes, guys, those achievement gaps takes multiple years to start to address those gaps and start seeing the evidence that it's closing. Not making excuses. Here's science at the high school. So this is basically whether or not they obtain proficiency. They scored in the ready or exceeds, they get a point. They include DLM, and you go, what in the world is that? That's your alternate assessment for your severely cognitively disabled students. So for science achievement, DLM counts in that as well if they were at the at target or advanced level on that assessment in science. And if they were below grade level, they did not receive a point, that student. Okay. Science then on growth, the next page is based upon a state percentile rank table. I did verify it is a state level one. We rank all the performance in elementary science in the state, and if the students aggregated at that school, if that student population at this particular school on average was at the 70th percentile or above, they received a point for every kid. If they're in the middle, 25th to 75th percentile, you get a half a point. And if they're in the lower quartile, they get 0. So there are lots of measures. I told you there were 11, and we look at them at a high school lens. On-time credits is, you get to define what gets awarded a credit in each school. Typically it's a D, y'all know that, or 60 or better counts as a credit, but it pulls that data out of the cycle data from transcripts, and then it awards it. So if they are able to find X number of credits for grade 9, if they find 5.5 credits, that student ID gets a point. It's like a light switch. They either do or they don't. If they have completed grade 10 and they're advancing to the next grade and they have at least 11 credits, they're going to get points for that. So lots of different measures here impacting. This school has no 9th graders, so that's why that's there. Okay.
Hey, Mel, I want to have time to show them the business rule document and, and get any questions.
Okay. Yep, let me hurry on. The only other thing I wanted to point out, the GPA, some of you involved with this, data's got to be reported. Cycle 7 is where GPAs for seniors are submitted. So they look to see a calculated GPA of 2.8 or higher. It's either you get it or you don't. Okay. And then last, I think I'm really going quick. Oh, Gina talked about this. If the kid ever had a 19, use his best AT scores, like if they've taken it 19 times even. If they ever had a 19 or greater on their composite, they get credited for that. Same thing with the benchmark points. Scoring at or above ACT's individual subscores. I think I'm about done, but look at how many opportunities. So one kid might count in all of these, Gina. If they engaged with a concurrent credit course and they find it on the transcript, boom, I get a point. If I don't have any of these rigorous courses on my transcript, I won't get a point. Gosh, computer science, same thing. There is a list of approved. They just look for course numbers on a kid's transcript and whether or not they have a D or better for a credit on that. Community service is the same way. So Gina, let me stop share so that you can get.
I'm going to start share real quick because I wanted to show you all real quick. You know, we talked about the grade span. How do we find the grade span and what you may be categorized? And every time I have a question or somebody asks me something, I go, oh, I'm not real sure. You can Google it. You all have access to all of the information. So if you'll notice, I'm just here in Google and I've got Arkansas ESSA business rules up here in my Google search and I hit enter. And there it is. Business rules for calculating the 2021 ESSA school index. It's going to give me this document. Anything that has changed or updated, they're going to put up here and they're going to give you the date and they're going to tell you all about it. I like to scroll down to get to the table of contents because this is where if you have any questions about anything, if you want to know more about that content growth score, you go to page 12. It's going to give you all that information. That's where I got my information from my presentation, and that's how Mel knows how all those reports work and all of that information. So I knew it was in here because this is the business rules. And if we scroll down, there it is. So to be categorized in the different areas, the different ranges, this is how the different things that they did the different grade ranges. Is that the table? That's the table, isn't it? Yep, so P1, P2, yeah. Pre-K, yeah. A 5th grade only. You know, so these are all that what they did is they looked at all the schools in Arkansas because we have so many different grade configurations and buildings, and they put them in one of these 3 buckets to determine if you're an elementary, if you're a middle, or if you're a high. And so
that's important because they use that as a comparison in and how they report how you're doing as a system.
That's right. That's right. So that's why, you know, you maybe see this school right here. It's a K9, is a K10, a K11. Then on-time credits count for that middle. So that's why that one is if applicable.
Gina, I'm going to share with them how letter grades are earned.
Yeah, I would love it. That's great.
As many resources as possible.
Yeah.
And this isn't mine. This is a state one. I guess I should put letter grades. Sorry, just giving you a link to anything. Okay. This has context now. Letter grades. So that one right there is
what. Share it. Share your screen real quick.
Oh, we got too much technology going right now. Hang on.
Flipping back and forth.
And there's no telling my email is liable to be up. So this is what I popped in the chat box for you. How letter grades are earned. And again, that's a state thing, but you know what they did? You know how we have a grading scale in our schools? well, I mean, some of us have gone to standards-based, I know, but typically we have a grading scale at a 90 to 100 is an A, an 80 to an 80, you know, like that. So basically, depending on the grade span you're compared to, elementary, middle, or high, there are cuts in here. So look, elementary, the overall ESSA index score of a 79.26, that's how an A gets awarded. If you're a high school and you have a 54, you're going to get a D. So I just thought this would be really good for you to have. This hasn't changed and it shouldn't change. But this is actually stuff put out. It's the second page of that. I use it a lot. I used it this year to calculate the what ifs, like what would the letter grade have been if it had been awarded, you know, just to kind of get an idea for how we performed as a state. So again, you have to know which grade span you're held to. The two I gave you, the first one was an elementary. So these are the cuts. The second one was the high school. So these are the cuts, and they're not the identical. It's a lower threshold for an A at the high school than it is at the elementary. It's based upon data of how these were set based in a standard setting environment at the time they were set. That's probably all I need to say about that.
So we're very hopeful that this was helpful and gave you some insight and maybe answered some questions that you may have. We would love to get your feedback before you leave, if you don't mind. It's helpful for us to monitor and make adjustments as needed. If there was something that you could share with us that was your biggest aha, or maybe something that you had no idea, that you're glad you had that information, because that's helpful for us to make sure that we, you know, make it very clear, you know, moving forward and anytime we do this. So we love the feedback. So if you can think of something that would just be, we'd love to know.
Yeah, we have a slide. Gina, pop our slide up there.
Gosh,
We have an exit. We have a bookend to our presentation. And
there it is. Okay. I got it.
kind of really good. Best practice, Gina and I are. There you go. Your exit ticket. Help us out. Tell us one thing you learned that you didn't know before today's session. Just one thing.
That helps us. It helps guide us on what others might not know going into it.
There's no wrong answers here. We want you to know that.
And we're so glad you guys were with us today. We appreciate you being here with us.
And we hope you have an amazing summer and get a little R&R.
In the chat. Great question, Sean. Yeah, in the chat.
Yep, in the chat. Yeah. I didn't read that. We've got some auditory learners. Whoop, that's me too. Thank you. I didn't read, I skipped that part.
Good. Very helpful.
Shauna, I agree. I love the reports. They're almost like over the top now. I almost have like, I think when I look at it, I'm like, I've seen that before on another page, but I mean, they're trying to present data in every way possible for us. Yep, Pam, Gina does a great job explaining growth. Elizabeth, the date, are you talking about like
data? She meant data, I bet.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah. All right. Well, we hope it was helpful. We appreciate you so much. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us.
Thanks, guys.